Okay, pre-cal classes, this is part 2 of section 1.1. And it has to do this section should not be that bad for us. The first thing we're going to talk about is the zero product property. And really this is like a formal way of saying basically saying what we've been solving, all these equations we've been solving for x and all this. This sort of formalizes it. The zero product property is a product of real numbers. It's zero if and only if at least one of the factors in the product equals zero. For example, they tell us to solve x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0. Now, you guys can solve it any way you want, but if they do tell you to solve it algebraically, you're not going to be able to just graph it and figure it out. You have to solve it algebraically. Well, a problem like this is pretty simple because you can just factor it. That should be easy to factor. Okay? Now, what the zero product property says is we have to account for when each one of those factors is 0. So x plus 3 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0. Subtract 3 from both sides, x equals negative 3, x equals negative 2. Now, guys, we've done this. This is not new material, okay? So this hopefully, now, if you can't factor it, you can use quadratic formula. You can use complete the square, okay? If you want to check it graphically, if you want to plug that in your calculator and graph it and find out where it crosses the x-axis to check, that's fine. But if it says solve algebraically, they want you to show your work and solve it out, okay? Now, for a problem like this, okay, again, it's already factored out for you. So again, what you would do is you would take each factor and set it equal to 0. Okay, so I would subtract 2, divide by 3, so x equals negative 2/3. Here, I would square both sides, so x minus 1 equals 0, add 1, x equals 1. Now, the thing you want to be careful of here, okay, is when you have an equation that has a square root in it, okay, we want to plug in both answers to make sure that what we're doing is good, okay? So make sure when you plug negative 2/3 in, okay, negative 2/3 is going to make that 0, 1's going to make that 0, we're okay. All right, so something that you don't really have to worry about, but just beware with square roots. Sometimes those problems get a little squirrely. So just make sure, plug them in, make sure everything works, okay? All right. Now this is sort of something that we've sort of been talking about. I've been talking about with you, but now we're sort of formalizing it and writing it down. So if a is a real number that solves the equation f of x equals 0, then these three statements are equivalent. First, that a is a root. Now root means solution of the equation f of x equals 0. Okay, so we could call a root. We could call a 0. Okay, the number a is a 0 of y equals f of x. Or the number a is an x-intercept of the graph of y equals f of x. So your coordinates would be a 0. Now, these all mean the same thing, guys. When we did the graphing calculator stuff, or at least today when we did it, we found out that, you know, when the graph, the x-intercepts are the answers. That's where the graph crosses the x-axis. That is where our answers are, okay? And that's where this x-intercept comes into play, all right? But they all mean the same thing. If they ask for a root, if they ask for a 0, if they ask for an x-intercept, all three of those things mean the same thing, okay? X equals whatever the answer is. So if we go here, now for this you're going to have to use your graphing calculator, and I haven't figured out how to put that on here yet. But they want us to look at this graph, okay? Now it says the z decimal window, not widow. No widows. Okay, on a graphing calculator. To be frank, I have not seen where the z decimal window is, okay? But what I would do is this. In your calculator, I would plug this in. So in your y equals window, 3 minus parentheses 1 divided by square root x squared minus 1. Now, if there's parentheses there, you got to finish them there, and then you got to put another one just to clinch it. I think in the TI-84s, you don't have to worry about the inside parentheses. But, again, just in case. Now, set your window. Do your X min would be negative 4.7. Your X max would be at 4.7. That's what this means. Your Y min would be negative 3.1. And your Y max would be positive 3.1. Now here's what you're going to find. It says, are there any x-intercepts? And the answer is, no, there are not. Okay? There are no x-intercepts. And you will see that when you do the graph. Because the graph does not cross the x-axis, ever. Now you might say, well, Mr. Habit, how is that possible? Well, think about it. Look at this fraction right here. First of all, can x be negative? No. X has to be greater than or equal to 1. Because I'm looking at this denominator, and actually the more I think about it, it has to be greater than 1. Because there's two things working here. 1, the denominator can't be 0. 2, you have a square root. So you have to avoid the bottom being 0. And you have to avoid the square root being negative. So those are the only x's you can use. Now here's the thing, all right? When x is greater than 1, all right, this number has the potential to get really small if you think about it. As x gets bigger and you square it and you subtract 1, you take the square root. This number on the bottom is going to start getting bigger. So you're going to have 1 over a big number, which if you do the decimal is going to be real small. So 3 minus that number is actually going to be getting closer to 3. So y is actually going to be getting closer to 3. Okay? This is sort of the introduction to limits. Okay? As x, I should do this. So that would be my interval. That would be my domain. Those are the possible x values. Anything from 1 or bigger. Okay? So as x, spell it right. Sorry. As x approaches infinity, y approaches 3. Because you're going to get 3 minus. Now, this number down here is going to be really, 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 really big because of the x squared minus 1. The bigger that x gets, and you square it, and you're only subtracting 1, so when you take the square root, you're going to get numbers bigger and bigger. Well, this number right here is going to approach, if I can get it in here, hang on a second. This number is going to approach 0. Because the smaller this decimal gets, the closer it's going to get to 0. Now, guys, answer this. Is this fraction ever going to equal 0? And the answer is no. It will never equal 0 because you have a constant term on the top. So when we say there's no x-intercepts, okay, that means that this graph does not cross the x-axis. Now, obviously, you're going to see that on your graphing calculator, but I wanted you to kind of introduce you to this concept right here. Okay? So that's going to be stuff we're going to talk about even later this week right here, this limit stuff, the domain. As x gets big, y approaches this number. Okay? But anyway, you can easily graph and tell whether it crosses the x-axis or not. So that's the second part of 1.1, and you'll be getting a worksheet on that Thursday. So make sure you watch this and take the notes, and you'll be all set.